Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first episode of You Don't Jazz No Berries. I am the host, Lady Karus, and with me is Impact Player.
And now, here's a special report coming to you, live out of Omaha, Nebraska. We would like to talk to you guys about a situation, to the best of our estimation, that has been swept under the rug. How many people out there remember my guy, James Scurlock? For those of you who don't remember who he is and need more information about my guy, James Scurlock, here we go. According to Wikipedia and other internet sources, he is a 22-year-old African-American man. He was gunned down in cold blood by Jacob Gardner, which, by the way, he is walking around free to this day right now. This murder occurred shortly after your boy George Floyd lost his life due to strangulation/suffocation with a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Now, let's take a moment to honor the fallen. On Saturday, May 30th, 2020, Jacob Gardner, the owner of The Hive and the Gatsby Bar in Omaha, Nebraska, took the life of this young man. Who is Jacob Gardner, you ask? Well, I can't say I met him personally, but I, the Impact Player, visited his establishments back in 2012. I always knew The Hive and the Gatsby Bar were doomed to fail, and that's just the genuine vibe I personally felt. Besides the fact that he owns 2 bars, he is a 38-year-old man and a former Marine. It is very hard to get any information on this guy. I mean, his Facebook, his Twitter, and all LinkedIn accounts have been literally shut down. Another fact about this man, Jacob, is he's a devout son following his father's morals and traditions.
So I actually heard they're having a court case hearing over this right now, so I'm curious to see what happens with that. On further events happening that night, residents of Omaha, Nebraska were protesting the life and death of George Floyd. Earlier in the week, before his Facebook account was shut down, you could see Jacob was posting something about a fire watch. That night, instead of conducting business inside of his bar, this man took it upon himself to stand outside and protect his bar by patrolling the streets. Now, the biggest question to ask is, at this time, protesters really didn't vandalize places of establishment. So why would he feel the need to protect his own business? Jacob was not alone in this crusade. His father, David Gardner, was also there with him. From surveillance footage taken the night of the altercation, it appears that David Gardner was involved in a confrontation with protesters, who he pushed and then they knocked him down. He also showed his gun to these same protesters. So another question to ask is, why did Jacob's father go after the protesters? And why did he go after them with a gun, no less? Eyewitnesses on scene even say they saw Jacob and his father both acting aggressively. What, his father too? I guess they both ran the establishment, but Jacob is the owner of the Hive and Gatsby Bar. Both Jacob and his father carried guns that night, and Jacob had an expired concealed carry permit. On the night of the murder, it is shown here how hostile Jacob was acting towards James. Law enforcement claims this is in self-defense. But in this image that is displayed, does James look like the aggressor? There were several eyewitnesses that identified that Jacob and his father were displaying hostile aggression towards the protesters.
It seems Jacob's father, David, had a huge role to play. Before protesters arrived in the old market, it looked relatively dry. But when protesters arrived in the general area, the first person to initiate contact and lead by example was Jacob's father, David. I understand it is morally incorrect to beat up on the elderly, but at this point, what do you do when the main antagonist is the elderly? When Jacob's father got made into short work, what son wouldn't stick up for their elderly father? Therefore, Jacob proceeded to make a big deal about the protesters attacking his father. But the proper response is to remove the elderly out of a harmful situation in an expeditious manner. Instead, in the video footage, you see a proud man that is not going to take any crap off of anybody. Therefore, he let it be known that he was packing some heat. Meanwhile, James Scurlock was there, but I don't think James and Jacob were the ones arguing at first. So this must mean James' fellow protesters were getting grilled out by Jacob. After the audio cuts out, we really don't understand what has been said next to initiate Jacob being tackled, but bam, he's down. 3 shots later, the last shot found his mark right into James Scurlock's neck. One protester spoke out. Her name is Elena Melendez. Elena is a 19-year-old protester who's been protesting the previous nights. She stated that she thought Jake, like they knew each other, but she said she thought Jake was a threat and tried to wrestle the gun from him, although she was unsuccessful. Another eyewitness, Robert Fuller, who was on scene, saw the confrontation that led to David being knocked down. Jacob's father appeared to be the aggressor after 2 men shoved him before being brutally pushed down. And Jacob accused some of the protesters of being the culprits, but Fuller said he only looked at black and brown protesters, which Scurlock was one of them. None of the witnesses were able to reach the police except Melendez with her comments.
So they couldn't reach anybody with the police department?
No.
I can't believe that.
Right?
Another quote from Melendez to Yahoo News. Nobody talked to me until after. They didn't try to talk to anybody at the scene. She was finally able to give her account to officers after Gardner was already in custody. Other witnesses say they too were not questioned by the police, who gave James medical aid at the scene. He died later at the local hospital. One white witness alleged that Jacob's father hurled racial slurs at protesters that may have led to the confrontation on the surveillance video. After James was shot, Jacob was taken into custody that night and questioned, but not arrested, and was released the next day. So the question here is, why were the witnesses never questioned when they could have provided more context to what happened? In the video, we can hear government officials say that they determined, but it's clear to see that Jacob and his father have retribution on their minds and in their actions. After a public outcry, Douglas County Prosecutor Don Kleen finally agreed to a grand jury investigation, but still says he believes his department was correct in releasing Jacob. Governor Pete Ricketts declared a curfew that night, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., after these protests. The governor said that what began as a peaceful protest has become hijacked by protesters of violence. He has mobilized the National Guard to help bring peace back to Omaha, he said. The violence we've seen is wrong. First, we got to have peace, and then we have to have an orderly society. We have to have people be able to feel safe in their own homes. I've been talking to folks in the old market, and they're scared to death. Police Chief Todd Schmaderer said police made 51 arrests Saturday night. 51 arrests. In his quote, he states, "The National Guard will be embedded in the Omaha Police Department. This is the last thing I want. And that's not who we are. We do not want military occupation."
51 arrests were made that night. That's pretty crazy in the year 2020. It seems like we're not done yet, and that's sad to say. Schmaderer said the majority of those arrests were Caucasian suspects, and they are in the process of compiling information on those arrests. And the information will be released to the media, and the FBI will do a background check on all the suspects that were arrested. He also said all Omaha police officers are working 12-hour shifts because at one point in time, crowds grew up to 4,000 people. Now, Nebraska self-defense law states a defendant's use of deadly force in self-defense is justified if a reasonable ground exists under the circumstances the defendant believes that he or she is threatened with death or serious bodily injuries, even if the defendant was actually mistaken about the existence and extent of their danger. State versus Miller. So, was Jacob and David afraid for their lives? If you're looking for the answer to the question, it is right there on the video footage. You can clearly see David Gardner stepping away from the premises of his son's bar. A few moments later, Jacob steps away from the bar as well. According to Nebraska's law, which you can see it in federal law as well, it states that your life have to be in clear jeopardy in order for killing to be considered in self-defense.
So there was really over 4,000 people in the crowd that night? That's crazy, but that's a really good turnout. Let's talk about some data that was obtained from the Omaha Police Department through a public records request. The record shows that Omaha Police Department sided with complainants about only 18% of the time, from 2013 to 2020. When the Omaha Police Department found an officer had violated policy following a citizen's complaint, they almost always received a warning or counseling. Rarely was an officer suspended or fired. As you can see by the chart here, only 0.5% of officers that had complaints filed against them were actually removed from the unit, where a whopping 49% only received counseling. Let's go over the U.S. police shooting statistics. Sadly, the trend of fatal police shootings in the United States seems to only be increasing, with a total of 558 citizens that have been shot, 111 of whom were black, as of July 29, 2020. In 2018, there were 996 fatal police shootings. Additionally, the rate of fatal police shootings among black Americans was much higher than that of any other ethnicity, standing at 31 fatal police shootings per million of the population as of July 2020.
And now in closing, we just gave you guys the cold hard facts about my guy, James Scurlock. If you would like more information, or if you would like to blog about it, or if you would like to review this episode once again, please visit us at www.theallstargang.wixsite.com/theallstargang. And please don't forget to hyphenate in between all and star on both the beginning and the end. That's it from us.